Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. It's great to see everyone. It's Thursday, November 4th, 2:33 p.m. We will now convene the Audits and Risk Management Committee. And first, we will have the roll. Trevor?
Before I call roll, I will read CalSTRS procedures for public comment. The CalSTRS board meetings are live web streamed and video archived and are available to the public on calstrs.com. Individuals who wish to address the board should dial into the public comment line at 833-986-0555 and wait for the 10-minute public comment period at the end of the agenda item the caller wishes to address. For comments not pertaining to a specific agenda item, there will be an opportunity for additional statements at the end of the open session. Each caller is allowed a maximum of 3 minutes to speak. However, if there is not enough time for each caller to have 3 minutes, the timing will be at the discretion of the chair. To protect the privacy of callers under the age of 18 who wish to address the board, only their first name and affiliated organization may be provided, but other personal identifying information such as their last name, age, or school may not be shared. I will now call roll. Ms. Higa? Ms. Yamamoto? Here. For the Director of Finance, Ms. Miller? For the State Treasurer, Mr. Ruffino? For the Superintendent of Public Instruction, Mr. Johnson? Here. Controller Yee, you have a quorum present.
Thank you very much, Trevor. Our first item of business will be the approval of the committee agenda with objection. Actually, approval of the committee agenda. I don't believe there are any. Oh, I'm sorry, Karen, please.
I wanted to remove items 3 and 4 from the consent agenda information.
Okay. We'll pull items 3 and 4
from
from the consent agenda to be considered separately. Okay. Any other items to be pulled or modified? Okay. So we have approval of the committee agenda. Is there any comment on this item? Public comment? Hearing and seeing none. Is there a motion? Okay, approve, motion by Ms. Higa, second by Mr. Ruffino. Okay. Do we need a roll call on that, or is that without?
No.
Okay, without objection. Okay, such will be the order. Next item will be our consent agenda, action item, approval of the minutes from July 9th, 2021. Thank you, Ms. Yamamoto, for the slight correction to the minutes. Always very grateful for your keen eye to this. Are there any comments on this item on the agenda? Seeing and hearing no public comment coming forward on this item. This is a consent agenda action item. Okay, we have a motion by Ms. Miller. Seconded by Ms. Yamamoto, without objection. That item is approved. Thank you. We now come to items 3 and 4, which were pulled off of consent. Item 3, which is an informational item relating to the annual report of benefit modifications for the fiscal year 2020-21. Ms. Yamamoto, please.
Okay. Well, I was looking at the dollar amount for those who received I'm looking at, I guess on page 5 of the item write-up, the 2 charts where it talks about the modification for those that increased benefit payment and for those who reduced payment. Do we know at this point what the largest amount that has been adjusted, and conversely, the ones that had the largest increase amount? Do we know those specific dollar amounts, figures?
This is Julie Underwood, Chief Financial Officer. Are you asking for the total population or just for member benefit payments? Because it includes monthly benefits as well as death payments. So just want to make sure I understand your question.
Well, you bring up a good point because I did not realize that the death benefit amounts were included in that figure. So that's separate, right?
It's
Okay,
included in this
so
total.
As far
report.
as without the death benefits, is that a lot of extra work or information that needs to be sought, or is that readily available?
I don't have that on me today, but we can investigate that for you and get that for you.
Okay, okay, because it's curious to see how that figures in.
Okay. So you just want to see a delineation? of-
Right,
Yeah,
right, because I didn't realize that the death benefits are this much, right? And the other adjustments could be smaller, but if you get, like, for this last year, we had a lot of deaths that were filed, and so that number is probably bigger than what it normally would be too, so thank you.
Yeah.
Lucy.
If I could just provide some clarification. So this particular report is a report of all overpayments and underpayments, so it's not just benefit modification. So Ed Code 24619 requires us to report all, so accumulated total of all overpayments made to members and all underpayments to members. And so that could include unreported death, so we had to sort of back pay or back collect some of the benefits that were paid out. So your question on what was the highest, we had the case where a death was not reported for several years that we have to collect back. So that was counted as an overpayment that was set up as a receivable.
Mhm.
So again, this particular report is not specific to like any benefit payment modification, but it's really to report out on the total overpaid or the total underpaid to satisfy the requirement for Ed Code 24619. So I don't know if that helps.
So if we found out what the average would be, then we would just take the count
Yeah.
divided by the dollar amount, and we would know the average then?
You could do that, but it's not really telling you that
Right,
that's the adjustment for a benefit. It's
right,
really
okay.
just saying this is what was paid out in total, and this is the impacted members that were paid out in total. So if you want a different information talking about, or just specific for a benefit modification, that would be a different work effort. And we could look into the
Uh-huh.
level of effort that needs to be done to be able to get that information. But really from an accounting perspective, it's just really reporting out, hey, we just want to let you know this is the total benefit overpayments or overpayments, and then this is the total underpayments for
Uh-huh.
the year.
Okay,
so what you're looking for, Karen, is really a delineation of the type of payment.
right,
And what we're doing here is actually tracking the flow of the payment, whether it's over, under, for
Yeah,
accounting purposes, right? So, but I guess to your request, is that information that could be compiled on an annual basis?
Yeah.
Yeah, we
Okay.
could look
Okay.
into it in terms of the level of effort, because from our branch, we don't see the level of details, but we can definitely partner with other
Okay.
units to see how we can get that information together.
And then on another level, is there delineation between retirees versus active?
We can look into that. I can't specifically say yes or no, but with active, this does not include refunds, and refunds are usually for active. So I would think that this is just really for retired,
Okay,
but I can definitely validate that
Okay.
information.
all right, I was curious.
Does that
Okay,
help?
Thank you, thank you.
Great, thank you. Any other comments on item number 3? Okay, do we have any public comment on this item?
There are no callers in the queue.
Oh my God, I'm losing.
Seeing and hearing none, okay. This is an informational item, so we will now move on to that we will receive. Item number 4.
Okay.
Karen, do you have?
Yeah,
Counselor
item
Jarvis.
number 4, I was looking at on page 2 of the write-up, there's illustration number 1. And so there's the audit findings, there's a number there, unresolved and resolved. And I know that I see this every time you report, but for some reason, something caught my eye and some questions came up as far as the audit findings. It says 110 audit findings. Is that a retired number? Is it active numbers? How does that how does that play out in fact? Is how many retirees are in that mix? And how does it, how, I can't even say this, and how does it affect the increases or decreases, or is this not available in this chart?
Okay, so the number of increases and decreases is not available in this
Okay,
chart.
okay.
The purpose of this chart was really to illustrate the total number of findings that were issued during this period of time, right? And at the same time, management and employer services is working with the employers to resolve those findings and make the corrections. And so what I was trying to illustrate is that, you know, management has done a really good job here resolving 103 findings. Now, a finding could apply to one individual or several hundred individual members, right? And so that information is really not in this report. I do provide a report, which is our mid-year report, as well as our year-end report, that does show some statistics on the audit finding that is applicable to our sampled member population. And those are in my reports to the committee. So for example, I think it was in 2020, we had 415 sampled members in total out of all of the reports that were issued. And 45 of those members were retirees, so about 18%, right? And to date in 2021, we've had 289 findings, or excuse me, sampled members, of which 45 were also retirees, so about 15 or 16%,
Okay.
right? Over the last several years, for our sampled member population, it's been averaging about 15%, right, that apply to retirees. It depends on our emphasis on the sick leave findings, right?
Okay.
Because generally the reported sick leave all apply to retirees.
Okay.
So now when you take those findings though, and you extrapolate that with the systemic population, then that information on whether it applies to a retiree or an active member is not tracked. Just the total number of members that were impacted, and I do report that to the committee in our year-end report as well, right? But it doesn't break it down by, you know, whether they're active or retired, and it doesn't. The dollar amounts I really don't get involved with, right? That's kind of outside of the audit process.
Okay.
So that's really employer services and in-service retirement that works, you know, with the dollar amounts and with members directly, right? We do have a special project with the employer reporting to final benefit that is Jeff Zimmer will be making a presentation to the committee tomorrow. And he is going to talk a little bit about the impact of these findings to active versus retired members as part of that.
Okay.
And he did provide me with some information on this, but it looks like in general, in quick summary, there was about this for fiscal year 2021, there was about 5,000 total members that were impacted by the systemic findings. Okay, so this would be in addition to our sample population, right? Of which he found 7% or 350 of those 5,000 were retirees. So it's
this much.
So it's a smaller amount, yes. Yeah, what ours is kind of more focused because of our data analytics. And so it includes more retirees,
Okay.
but in general, what he found here, but we don't have like a year over year report that we provide on this. And I don't know how readily available that information is available. I think, you know, that Julie said earlier about maybe we can get together and, you know, between fiscal and audits and employer services and kind of figure out if that's something that we can, you know, prepare a report like
Yeah.
that for.
Well, I think it's good to know, but I don't want to create any information that's going to require going, you know, way deep into the analytics that we have. So I think as long as I have just kind of a ballpark figure of what that looks like in comparison to the numbers that you're giving us, then that would be okay.
Yeah.
So just another follow-up question. So as far as still looking at the illustration number 1, where you talk about the findings,
Uh-huh.
the findings are like if one district has 10 findings, then how is that still 1 of 110, or is that minus
If they have 10 findings,
This
it's 10
10.
findings.
10 findings is 10 findings, no matter how many districts it
That's
covers?
correct.
Okay,
Right.
that's what I
Yeah,
thought,
and
but,
they can be resolved at different periods of
Right.
time,
okay, all right,
depending on the extent of work they have to do.
Good.
Yeah,
okay, thank you.
okay.
Great,
Thank
thank you.
you.
Thank you, Karen. Any other comments or questions on item number 4? Okay, any public comment on this item?
We have no callers in the queue.
Seeing and hearing none, okay, we will take this informational item and receive it as well. Do we need to take a roll call since it was pulled off consent? It's informational. We don't need to act on this since we're just receiving the report. Yeah, okay, got it. All right, very well, thank you. We now move on to our first action item of in terms of our annual independent audits, and that is item number 5. This is relating to our independent financial statement auditor reports for the year ending June 30th, 2021. What I'd like to do, members, is to take 5A and 5B together. And I'm going to ask Larry if you'll introduce the item. And we do have Kevin Smith and Jen Aris with Crow here with us today.
Great, thank you very much. As you indicated, Crow LLP performed an audit of our basic financial statements. They essentially performed 2 audits. One was of the basic financial statements, and the other was of other pension information, and which is our schedule of proportionate share of contributions for employers and non-employers. These both are for the period ending June 30th, 2021, and management at CalSTRS is responsible for preparing those reports. And that will be presented to the board tomorrow at its meeting in full, and have a discussion about the details of the report. But the independent financial statement auditor audited those financial statements and expressed an opinion on whether they were presented fairly, and that's what they're here today to really have a discussion about, and whether they observed any weaknesses in financial reporting or financial reporting risks that they would like to share with the committee. So again, Kevin Smith and Jen Aris are here to present to us, and they have a presentation that they'd like to share.
Thank you.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
members of the ARM Committee. I think I start off each year saying it's a pleasure to be here. It truly is a pleasure to be here. So thank you. Crow is delighted to be here at the conclusion of the audit to share the results of those audits that Larry referred to. Okay, so I go back. So for our agenda today, we'll discuss the Crow engagement team, which is much larger than Jen and myself, as well as the presenters provided a picture on the next page so you can see us without our mask. We're really going to cover 2 topics: the CalSTRS financial statement audit, or the audit of the entire system. We'll cover the independent auditor's report. We'll go over the required communication under professional standards to those charged with governance, which is this committee. And then we'll also discuss the independent auditor's report over internal control. Almost as an exact replicate of that, we will discuss those same 3 topics as it relates to the audit of the other pension information. And when Jen presents that, that's really the information that your school districts utilize in order to record the liability for the net pension liability. And as always, we'll provide an opportunity for questions and discussion at the conclusion, but also prepared to answer any questions that you might have as we go through the presentation. Jen and I serve as the engagement partners on this engagement. Overall responsibility is to sign the opinion that we'll refer to, and really lead a team of over 20 people who work on this engagement throughout the year. And this year, I'd love to say was, unprecedented, but it was very similar to FY 2020. The entire engagement was performed remote. I really want to stress and thank management for for their responsiveness throughout the audit engagement. Audits are always kind of additive to their day jobs. And when I think about all of the things facing CalSTRS during fiscal year 21, for them to respond back in such a timely fashion and for us to be here in November really is a testament to their professionalism, as well as how serious they take the process. Again, we have been performing these procedures. We began planning in October of 2020 up through March of 21, and then really executed through December and September. We have presented these findings to management and prepared to discuss those with you today.
As Kevin alluded to, with regard to the basic financial statements, there are really three main deliverables. And so we're going to walk through each of those and highlight the key items for you here. Just a bit more detail of what we're going to dig into. So starting first with the independent auditor's report, even Larry mentioned, these financial statements are really management's responsibility. Management is responsible not only for the balances that are reflected within those statements, but also the disclosures related to all of the key items that are presented there. Really, our job as your auditor is to only add 3 pages into that whole packet of paper that you have in front of you. So definitely takes the effort of management throughout the process. The opinion does outline the auditor's responsibility. We actually audit under 2 separate sets of standards when we look at your basic financial statements. We not only are following generally accepted auditing standards, but also following governmental audit standards as well. So high level of scrutiny that we apply there. We, as the auditor, are looking to make sure that the amounts are correct, as well as that the disclosures are complete and accurate. So we're looking again at all components there within the financial statements. Everything that we do really culminates here in this paragraph, which is the opinion on those financial statements. And so Crowe has issued an unmodified or a clean audit opinion on the basic financial statements as of June 30, 2021. And this is exactly what you would expect or want to receive with regard to your audit. As the auditor, we have the option to emphasize certain matters throughout the audit process. And so we've included emphasis of matter with regard to 2 items within the financial statements and have specific paragraphs for those that we've excerpted for you here on the next 2 slides. So I'll speak to each. We've also included the relevant footnote information from management's financial statements to support each of those emphasis items. The first really is with regard to the assumptions that are applied in the development of the actuarially calculated total pension liability. And so given the sensitivity of those assumptions, management's involvement within that process, we feel it important for the reader to understand that those assumptions are utilized to calculate that number. It also contributes to a key performance indicator. The very last item listed there at the bottom of the first table, the fiduciary net position as a percentage of the total pension liability. The second item that we've emphasized for the readers has to do with the fair value of investment securities. And so for these assets, there really isn't a readily determinable fair value. Management has a comprehensive approach in place, but really is dependent upon information that's provided by general partners and investment advisors. And so because of the sensitivity of that information, we again draw the reader's attention to that. Pass it back to Kevin.
Thank you, Jen. So the second deliverable that we provide is our required communications for SAS 114 statement on auditing standards 114. Without reading the entire letter to you, I just want to hit some of the key spots that I believe that the ARM committee should be aware of, and go to the letter for more detail. But the letter highlights our auditor responsibilities under both generally accepted auditing standards promulgated by the AICPA, as well as GAGAS or government auditing standards. The planned scope and timing of the audit was very consistent with the planned approach that we outlined to this committee prior to beginning the engagement. And as you may recall, we really, although focused on the entirety of the financial statements, there were several key considerations Very consistent with previous years, we focus very heavily upon the existence and valuation of investments, particularly those that you might deem to be hard to value, your alternative investments, including private equity, real estate, et cetera. And as Jen said, we also spend a significant amount of time evaluating the actuarial assumptions, that being the reason for the 2 emphasis of matters. We also look very closely at the revenue recognition, particularly over the last 2 years as it's related to Senate Bill 90 and Assembly Bill 84, and any impact that that may have from a timing perspective as to when those should be recognized within the financial statements. Other matters that have required kind of special attention was continuing to focus on the impact of COVID-19 as it may potentially impact CalSTRS. That can be as simplistic or in your mind thinking of the volatility of the investment markets, but it can also be talked about the internal control structure embedded within your system of internal controls. The remote environment, perhaps not the same level of review and supervision in person, et cetera, but really understanding what impact COVID-19 had over the processes. Then the other thing I really want to point out is that we look at all financially significant IT systems. We have IT resources who assist us throughout the performance of that engagement. But as a gentle reminder, that is financially significant systems as of June 30th, 2021. So that would not include the new pension solution system. We really embed our audit effort as it relates to pension benefits and actuarial information as within the START system. So have not begun looking at the pension solution at this point in time. The letter also highlights the significant accounting policies, management's judgments, and accounting estimates. We look at those both from are they consistent with what we would expect from an implementation of standards, the qualitative aspects of those of their policies, really looking for, are they overly aggressive or overly conservative? Is there a management bias in how they report? We noted no areas of that matter and really believe that the accounting policies are appropriate for the system. The letter further talks about the qualitative aspects of the significant accounting policies, corrected misstatements and uncorrected misstatements. So when we opine and give that unmodified opinion, it's really important to understand, did the audit identify any exceptions as it may relate to the financial statements? There were no corrected misstatements, so nothing that we identified through our audit process that required adjustment. That's really important from a management's perspective, because I could have rendered an unmodified opinion and nonetheless had to, management may have required to booked 30, 40, 50 entries in order to receive that unmodified opinion. There were absolutely 0 corrected misstatements identified through our audit procedures. We did have 1 uncorrected misstatement as it relates to the fair value of alternative investments. That was actually identified by management through their internal controls and processes, and really relates to the comparison of their initial estimate of fair value of alternative investments at June 30th compared to what they ultimately receive in Q2 partnership statements that are received as the audit progresses. The other communications were everything that we would disclose here is to the positive or the negative as appropriate, but everything that you would hope to hear. We have read and compared all of the other information within the financial statements to the financial statements and noted no inconsistencies. We did not encounter any significant difficulties throughout the engagement, nor did we have any disagreements with management. We're not aware of any significant consultations with other accountants, and we've asked for the standard representation letter from management, and they have signed. There were no significant issues discussed or significant correspondence with management prior to being engaged, and there were no other findings or issues that we find relevant or significant that we would need to make you aware of. The third and final product or deliverable is the independent auditor's report on internal controls over financial reporting. This is a byproduct called for under government auditing standards, and it really points out that we obtain sufficient understanding of the entity and its environment, including internal controls, in order to plan and execute the audit. So it's not an audit of your internal controls, but we're required to understand those controls, test the design, and in some cases, operating effectiveness. If we identify any material weaknesses or significant deficiencies through that, we're required to communicate that to this committee. There were no significant deficiencies or material weaknesses identified. I pause there to say, if you remember, and I'm sorry, my mask keeps coming down just a little bit. If you remember last year, we did have a significant deficiency as it related to the application of kind of a nuance within GASB 72. It wasn't an exception as it related to fair value, but the hierarchy of the fair value. Management significantly addressed that finding. We did not have a deficiency. We did not have a significant deficiency. They were very engaged, developed policies, procedures, as well as internal controls to remediate that finding.
All right, now we're going to shift our focus away from the basic financials and talk about the other pension information or the schedule of proportionate share. And given some of the uniqueness of this particular schedule, not really being a financial statement, if you will, we wanted to take a moment and talk about really the scope of the work here. So the other pension information is not required by GAAP, and it's issued really for management to assist the contributing entities in preparing their own financial statements. And so the auditors of those other entities are utilizing this evidence as part of their performance of audits and preparation of financial statements for the employers themselves. Because of this, we have a restriction of use paragraph included within our opinion that really just speaks to the fact that this schedule is being prepared for a specific purpose for specific entities, and that it's not to be utilized as a basic financial for other individuals or other purpose. So the next two slides here really highlight the specific captions or information that we are issuing an opinion on, Crowe is issuing an opinion on, that is all part of the schedule of proportionate share, again, utilized by the employers and the non-employer contributing entity. And so these are those specific caption totals here. So moving on then to discuss a little bit more about our opinion. Again, we have issued an unmodified opinion with regard to our audit of the schedule of proportionate share. And that schedule specifically covers not only the proportionate share for each contributing employer, and non-employer contributing entity, but also the specific caption totals for the net pension liability, and then the deferred inflow and outflow information as well that we just looked at. Again, we have an emphasis of matter paragraph here in our opinion, and it's very similar to what we just looked at with the basic financials. This is focused on, again, the actuarial information and the sensitivity of those assumptions that are utilized in calculating that total pension liability that then is allocated to the employers in the schedule of proportionate share as a net pension liability. And Kevin will pick up from here.
The second deliverable you find on ARM item 5B attachment 2, very consistent with the SAS 114 or required communications that I went through with respect to the financial statements. We have fulfilled our responsibilities both under GAS and GAGAS as Jen referred to. The plan, scope, and timing of the engagement was very consistent with what was outlined to this committee prior to beginning. Very quickly, you will notice a few differences within the footnotes. It really takes certain information from the financial statements and carries forward, but not all. It addresses the significant accounting policies, primarily as it relates to revenue recognition or contributions, as well as the information derived to utilize to derive the net pension liability as of June 30th, 2021. One key point to make there on the net pension liability, that may be a number that you don't see in other presentations, because unlike the actuarial valuations that you see, which perhaps have smoothed assets, this is the net pension liability. So it's the TPL, which is very similar, but then it just is reduced by the fiduciary net position of CalSTRS as of June 30th. So the significant gains from March 31st to June 30 would be reflected there versus smooth. So that's why this is a different number, and that performance measure that Jen referred to earlier, why it's so high. The footnotes, the significant accounting policies, although not GAAP, we believe are consistent with guidance promulgated within the AICPA as it relates to assist your users or your employers in being able to apply GASB 68. Again, in the affirmative, we had no corrected misstatements. We did not have any uncorrected misstatements as it relates to these schedules. And then from the other communication standpoints, again, everything that you would hope for. No significant difficulties with management, no significant issues noted, or other matters required to be brought to your attention. We also issue that same independent auditor's report on internal control over financial reporting. And there, again, no significant deficiencies or material weaknesses were identified as it relates to the other pension information. That's the conclusion of our prepared remarks, but we would be happy to answer any questions as it relates to the conduct of the audit.
Great, thank you for the presentation. I think before we entertain questions, let me just turn to Dr. Yetman for any observations.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You correctly presumed I had a couple questions. Thank you. Thank you for your work this year in doing the audit in trying circumstances. We greatly appreciate that. I do have a couple questions for you. One is, as it relates to the distance nature of the audit, do you feel that you were able to conduct as good an audit as you would as if you were able to be back in person? Do you feel that there were limitations from the distance caused any limitations, or were you able to do an effective audit?
Simple answer is yes, we were able to do an effective audit. You know, the really unique thing about the last 2 years is that the auditing standards do not change. We're still required to perform the same procedures, whether in person or remote, and obtain the same level of evidence. I'm probably a little older and think that sometimes we can be possibly a little more efficient in certain areas in person. But Dr. Yetman, I really think at some point there will be a hybrid approach. What we've learned over the last 2 to 3 years, I think will carry forward for quite some time. But simple answer, effective audit.
I think I agree with what you're saying with respect to, and I would look for that if I were the board, to some aspects of the audit will continue to be done in a remote fashion, even once we're allowed to come back. What this did is it forced the auditing industry to confront a non-in-person audit. And it was discovered, not just by our auditors, but by auditors across the country, that there are some things that are actually easier to do remote and more efficient and can be effective with cost savings. And so I would expect those processes to work their way in and become standard. My next question is related to the valuation of hard to value assets. As you mentioned, you pay particular attention to that because for the organization, it's rather important. Could you give the board just quickly some sense of what auditing techniques you perform to verify that the numbers management presents are accurate? And of course, I'm not asking you to describe the entire audit, but just some sense of what process an auditor goes through to make sure that those numbers are materially correct.
So first and foremost, it starts with the comment about the internal control. We're required to assess the internal controls that management has in place over both the existence of these alternative investments and the valuation, and noting whether there are any significant deficiencies or material weaknesses that perhaps may cause more risk as it relates to either of those audit assertions. At that point, we move to kind of more of the substantive nature. And then we address that through confirmation. We confirm both with the custodian kind of globally what is recorded within your portfolio. And then on a sample basis, we actually confirm directly with the general partners. Now, confirmation provides us evidence of existence. It does not provide evidence or sufficient evidence of valuation. So we then have to take another step deeper and really start thinking about how do we know that this estimate is not unreasonable? Because the one thing I can tell you about what is recorded within the alternative investments is that it's not right to the dollar. It's not actively traded on an exchange. It is an estimate as of June 30th of what the fair value in that limited partnership is. We look at a variety of things depending upon the nature of the asset. It could be appraisals, it could be external financial statements, and really try to understand the fair valuing techniques that the general partner layered in, as well as what management or their specialist have layered on top of that to obtain their reasonable assurance.
Thank you. I hope the board found that useful, sort of a window into what they do with one of the more difficult to value assets. My next question is, do you anticipate any turnover of key staff for this coming year? That's a hard question to answer because you don't know. Someone might up and quit and move, but is there any anticipated?
There is, we have one person on a leave of absence that I would deem to be a critical or a key person at the manager level. This past year, in order to somewhat alleviate his workload, we brought in a second manager that worked right alongside. He will be returning on the engagement. I wish I had a crystal ball. The Great Resignation has impacted the entire profession and will continue to impact Crow as well. But one thing I can commit to you is that we will always have our best and brightest, minus myself, on this engagement.
Well, we're certainly thankful for the consistency we've had over time so far. We appreciate that. Another question is related to the audit itself and the organization. Could you describe just very briefly the level of cooperation you received from management with respect to the audit from the very top on down, please?
You know, this engagement covered two different CEOs. I can tell you that we had direct access to both. The tone at the top is absolutely amazing as it relates to how serious the audit engagement is taken. The other thing I think people sometimes lose sight of is that they may think that we just interact directly with the CFO and Julie's group, and only Julie's group, but our audit really encompasses a variety of business units here at CalSTRS. We spend significant time with your contributing entities or the school districts, as well as member services, investment branch, everyone, the IT department really get hit throughout the audit engagement. Those directors of those business units all actively support our efforts with either interactions directly with them or how they ask their teams to interact with us. Again, I believe CalSTRS is probably one of the first June 30th pensions to be issued on an annual basis. Being here in early November is absolutely amazing, and it's due to the level of interaction that your team provides. It's bar none, top of the line.
Thank you. Were you denied access to any person you requested to speak with or denied access to any information you needed to see?
No.
Thank you. That's all my questions, but I'd like to address the board if I may. So this is just really great news. It's a clean audit, but I want to make sure that the board understands the limitations of an audit. So an audit really just looks at the organization's financial statements and also looks at the internal control system as required to gain an understanding of the internal control system. But the internal control system of CalSTRS obviously doesn't stop there. It involves the entire organization and it's embedded within it. So it would include, for example, Mr. Brian Bartow and Chief Legal. It would include Mr. Jensen and his internal audit staff, Ms. Deeds and the compliance staff. It would include information technology as well, Mr. Ashish Jain. It would include, of course, April Wilcox and the investment group, and of course, Mr. Ailman as well. So internal control is something that happens every day. It's not, I just want to make sure, it's not just once a year, we're one and done here. That's not it at all. The audit is an integral part. It's like a stethoscope, I think, right? A doctor diagnoses you and puts that stethoscope there, and it's one piece of information that the internal control system is functioning, and all good through the stethoscope. But it's much more than that goes on. It's an integral part of the organization that really starts from the top on down, through everyone, just from the time they check in and have to walk through their key card to get up the elevator to the time they log into their computer and have to change their password once in a while. It's a daily fight. I like to think of it as just a daily chore to keep internal controls solid within an organization. And so that's one role the auditors play, is to look at a piece of that. It's a role that Mr. Jensen plays to look at it as well through the internal audits that are done within the organization, a critical part of it as well. So it's really just a large team effort that goes on almost every day, there's an aspect to it. But today we celebrate the audit nonetheless. And so that I'll shut up here, Madam Chair, I promise just in a second. May I give some thanks to some people who were particularly instrumental in helping with the audit? Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, ma'am. So with respect to accounting, of course, ultimately, the CEO is responsible for the financial statements, and the CEO, of course, relies on the CFO. And of course, the CFO, Julie, doesn't do all the work herself. She has people that really, year after year, do some work. And so I'd like to thank Mr. Art Martinez. I think I've mentioned his name, I don't know, it feels like a decade now. Art just shows up, and him and his crew, he'd be the first to praise his crew, in particular, Benki Futun. Oh boy, man, I need some glasses. It stinks getting old. Benki Fatunla, Conrad Paterno, and Kelly Mariano. And if I pronounced your names, please forgive me. But these individuals were extremely instrumental in putting together these financial statements. The auditors did a lot of work, but they're right. There's just like, well, about 6 pages in there that are yours. But the rest of it's management put that together, right? And someone had to do that work, and someone had to put those numbers. Someone had to roll all that up. And these individuals were instrumental in getting that done. And Mr. Smith is right. Getting this done by now, getting right, close the books and get the audit done and present in November is quite unusual, I would say. But we manage every year. No promises next year, but it's instrumental. Now, finally, I'd like to thank the investments branch. As you know, investments are a considerably important part of the organization. It's crucial to help the retired teachers meet their goals. And investments it's really hard to value some of these assets. It's really hard to keep track of everything that's going on. And I would like to personally thank April Wilcox. April and I, she has made the effort to reach out to me multiple times and inform me of what they're doing with the internal control system that I mentioned earlier in investments. And there were a couple of people this year who were just really instrumental in assisting our auditors with the investments information. That would be Melissa Durango and David Munoz. These two folks just really put time and effort. They met with you, I think, weekly, was it? Yeah, they met with the auditors weekly to assist them in ensuring that the investments portion of the audit, which is critical because it's the hardest part to do, especially with these alternative investments. And having that communication, that strong, open, transparent communication between staff and the auditors is really important. It's a really important feature. So I'm very grateful to these individuals. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Dr. Yetman. Thank you for the acknowledgements, and certainly concur with that. Given the circumstances under which this particular audit cycle found ourselves in, I don't know that we could have expected much more. It really was to have a clean audit, to really have no findings this year, and but for a small restatement due to the issue he raised, Kevin, about the lag in reporting valuations for some of the alternative investments. It really is, I think, just a remarkable testament to how the team across the enterprise pulled together. So just very, very grateful for the work. I'm going to turn it over to committee members for any questions and observations. Joy, want to start?
Thank you, Betty.
Yeah.
So this also, wanted to add for the great results this year. Dr. Yetman, your questions and then your comments to the board are also just always really helpful to help, to remind us about what's important that we heard, what's important that we didn't hear, asking the questions that we may not think about. So thank you also. One question one thing I think I just wanted to ask kind of for the record and for anybody who might be listening is acknowledging that this is an audit of our financial statements. There are other significant initiatives that the CalSTRS is managing and that the board is overseeing, but that are not reflected in our financial audit because although they're significant priorities to us, like the construction of our new headquarter building or the pension solution project implementation, the dollars associated with those are still really small relative to the size of the overall fund. So could you just maybe comment on that Kevin or Dr. Yetman and just, kind of confirm why those are not in scope for the audit.
So the aspects of it are, aspects of it are not. So the second tower, the amount as of June 30th that has been spent on that tower is capitalized on your balance sheet. You are right, from a qualitative or a quantitative standpoint, relatively immaterial to the investment portfolio, but recognizing the importance of that it is to management, we do select a few transactions, as well as really spent time, not in this year's audit, but the previous year, understanding that bond issuance and any covenants that might be embedded there. So that one's in scope. It's just a very small piece. The expenditures as it relates to the new pension system is within scope. And we're actually doing certain procedures right now in coordination with management in anticipation of it at some point in time becoming financially significant. But this audit opinion and the report on internal controls is really addressed at the IT systems that generate numbers on your balance sheet as of June 30th. And the new pension solution system does not generate those numbers yet. At some point they will, and it will be a financially significant system.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Ben.
Thank you, Joy. I really appreciate the question in terms of how those aspects are reflected. Larry, and then Dr. Yetman. Please.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to note that, those large projects that you had mentioned there, they are subject to internal audits, and we do look at the controls around that, and then that information does flow into the financial statements. And so we want to make sure that there's good controls in place so that that information is accurate at the time of the audit, right? And so we are really involved with those too from many aspects.
Yeah.
Which between what we're seeing in front of us today and maybe some of the limitations or the narrowness around what this audit is looking at compared to other controls or review we have in place.
Yeah, the board's oversight and budget management is outside of this, but that's really a big part of it too. Right.
Dr. Yetman, anything? Yeah, there you go. Other questions or comments, members? Hearing any others? I also just wanted to acknowledge just the leadership across the enterprise for just being so attentive to certainly the finding that we had last year relative to the issue around the value hierarchy. And I know Julie and Scott and everyone just really came together in pretty quick order to bring focus and attention to this to where it is has really been addressed. And so just very happy that that has not continued to be a finding that is before us today. So thank you. And then to the investment office to just have the designated individuals to be go-to resources so we could keep the process moving was just really critical as well this year. So just kudos all the way around. And I think to Dr. Yetman's point, we may be actually establishing best practices in this new environment without even knowing it. So really appreciate the documentation of how we are proceeding with this process, particularly for this past year. Thank you. So we do have both of these items before us. Is there any public comment on this item?
There are no members of the public in queue.
Thank you very much, Samantha. Okay, so we have items 5A and B. So the motion, I entertain a motion to accept the independent auditor's report and approval of the proposed resolution of the 2020-21 financial statements on both items. Okay, thank you. I have a motion by Member Miller, seconded by, thank you, from Blake. So let's call the roll on this one.
Ms. Hika?
Yeah.
Ms. Yamamoto?
Aye.
Ms. Miller for the Director of Finance? Mr. Ruffino for the State Treasurer?
Aye.
Mr. Johnson for the Superintendent of Public Instruction
Aye.
and Controller Yi.
Aye. Thank you very much. Those items have been accepted by the committee. Thank you so much. Okay, members, our next item is an informational item. This is item number 6 relating to the 2021 management letter. Larry?
Thank you. I think it's great that you have the opportunity to hear from your financial statement auditors, before the full board review tomorrow and hear their opinion with regards to the information that will be presented. In connection with that audit, the auditors will identify deficiencies, and if it's a material or a significant deficiency, they will include that in the audit report. And if it doesn't rise to that level, however, then they put it in a report or a management letter. And that, according to the auditing standards, the independent auditor is not required to provide that information necessarily to the board. However, because we want to promote transparency and ensure the board is fully informed, we present this report to the committee, and there is an observation that was outlined in here by Crow. You may recall last year there was 4 separate observations, one with regards to active member data, Medicare premium payment program census data, as well as the START administrator accounting and monitoring, and precision of financial statement review. Management has addressed 3 of those 4 issues. They're no longer included in the report, and I think that's really great. However, the issue with regards to active member data, completeness and accuracy remains in the management letter, and this has been an item that we've been addressing at CalSTRS for several years. It was initially cited as a material and deficiency and weakness in control, and then was cited as a significant deficiency. And then it was just a deficiency in the management letter the last few years. And while the auditor acknowledges the significant steps that management has taken to address the issue, it does remain an ongoing challenge for us. And we have a lot of effort that is being made as outlined in the management letter. And management had agreed with the recommendations. They will be addressing that through continued enhanced training, responding to employer inquiries, preparing employers for the new secure employer website for Benefit Connect, and then also initiated a large employer reporting to final benefit project as outlined in the management letter. The independent financial statement auditor, Crow, has also reviewed management's responses and concurred that those efforts will in part address this deficiency. And so if you have any questions, Julie is here as well to answer those, and otherwise we'll just present this report to the committee.
Great. Thank you, Larry. Let me turn to Dr. Yetman for any observations on this.
Just very quickly, don't expect this to go away.
Yeah.
You have a lot of different employers, and they all have their own staff. They all have their own reporting systems. And quite frankly, the law is complicated. It's not easy to understand. And so as long as those 2 things are present, I think you're always going to see some level of uncertainty with respect to the employer reporting. And so this is just, the auditor feels compelled to pull it out, which is the right thing to do. But nonetheless, it's so much work and effort is going into to reconcile these as best they can. The organization is doing just an excellent job at it. So I really, although it comes up and it's called a deficiency, if it were important, I would tell you that, hey, you got to look at this. This is not one of those things. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Yetman. Appreciate that this is going to be an issue that will be with us. But I think what's important is how we're responding to it, and the whole array of tools that we have put forth. And maybe Julie and Larry, you can just kind of run through some of those, and probably even more in the works as we're identifying these issues ongoing.
Audit services will continue to monitor management's efforts and provide periodic reports to the committee as well, and provide updates on how we're doing at addressing this.
Okay.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
I just wonder from Dr. Yetman if you have seen kind of best practices of recognizing that this issue is here forever, but if you have seen ways that folks have mitigated it.
This is the best practice I've ever seen.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah.
Good job, Mr. Jensen. That
Oh,
is
no.
high
Well,
praise.
yeah,
Every-
Jill.
yes,
Ever management, yeah.
Yes, good. That's amazing. I'm happy to hear that.
Yeah. Julie, anything to add on this one?
No, just I really appreciate Dr. Yetman, you calling out specific staff members that have worked so hard on the audit, but just in general, just everyone, there's a lot of people in the organization that have a role in this process, and just want to, do a shout out to everyone and say thank you and really appreciate all their efforts and hard work to get us to this.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions on this item? 2021 management letter? Okay. Seeing none, do we have any public comment on this item?
There are no callers in the queue.
Thank you, Samantha. Okay, thank you very much. We will take that and receive that information. Next item is item number 7. This is our 2021 compliance plan and compliance director update. And let me have Cheryl come forward.
Good afternoon. It's good to see everyone. I appreciate this opportunity to provide our 2022 risk-based enterprise compliance services plan. Given that this committee has an oversight responsibility over the compliance program, I look forward to your input on this plan. Okay, my presentation today will discuss the integrated risk assessment approach, briefly hit upon the compliance risk assessment, and then conclude with the 2022 highlights of the compliance plan. The full plan can be viewed at ARM Agenda 7, Attachment 1. The plan we developed supports the growth of the compliance program and aligns with best practices. This year, internal audits, enterprise risk management, and ECS performed an integrated risk assessment. In addition to those items you see up there that benefits that integrated risk assessment, the approach also generated value through use of common and consistent risk and control language. It created process efficiencies. It also reduced the interruptions to business operations, and it enabled data sharing to realize a holistic view of our risk and mitigations that are occurring across the organization. So integrating our assessments supports the maturing of a compliant or risk assessment approach, and it also contributes to each of our goals. So for enterprise compliance services, we use this to identify risk and allocate our resources towards those highest compliance risks. So the compliance risk assessment is an essential component of a robust and mature compliance program. It aligns with the Department of Justice guidance, and most importantly, it provides that proactive stance towards focusing on the focusing on the risk and mitigations that are occurring across the organization. So integrating our assessments again supports that mature process. And this year, we did do a couple of things to mature the compliance risk assessment. I'd like to share those two things with you. Through this effort, we were able to refine our risk profile. And so from that, we were able to increase our material risk from 10 to 12. And then also we identified additional principal risks, 30 of them actually. So we increased our total risk profile to 70. And then another key highlight from this year's compliance risk assessment is that we quantified our risk for the first time. So previously we used qualitative inputs to assess our risk, compliance risks. This year we quantified, which that change allows us to assess the inherent and the residual compliance risks. So again, those two items, changes to our risk assessment process, just kind of demonstrates the maturing of our compliance risk assessment. Whoops. All right, so these are our compliance assessment results. And as you can see, the organization has made great strides in reducing the inherent risks as evidenced by the residual scores. So although the regulations will continue to change, so it's important to stay focused on those compliance risks in order to avoid compliance issues. So through our risk assessment, we identified the top 6 material compliance risks that are highlighted in red. And this is actually driving where we're going to spend our time. Compliance activities will be spent in these areas. Also, if you want the detail of those 6 top risks, you can find those in at the appendix, slide 12. Nope, slide 11. Okay. So I wanted to provide you another view of our compliance risk assessment, which is similar to how Enterprise Risk Management provides the board their enterprise risk report. And again, it just clearly demonstrates the risk reduction efforts across the organization due to the design and implementation of controls. Then as you can see, our 12 material risks, those are defined in the appendix on slide 12. And then also on slide 13 of the appendix gives you an example of how we structured our compliance risk profile. Okay, so while the 2022 plan in the agenda is very detailed, I just want to spend a few moments to some key compliance activities that we will use to address the top 6 risks. So consistent with enterprise risk and due to the frequency and sophistication of cyber attacks, it's probably no surprise that information security is a top compliance risk. So in consideration with the monitoring and oversight being performed by the Information Security Office and the annual security review that's coordinated by internal audits, ECS plans to continue coordination with information security to review and highlight information security policies and standards. In addition, we'll participate in the implementation of the governance, risk, and compliance tool. And then also, ECS plans to develop a compliance and ethics accountability matrix that clearly defines the roles and responsibilities and compliance roles and responsibilities and actions that is occurring across the organization. This matrix will be a resource for the organization to enhance transparency, but also promote compliance for those laws, regulations, and policies and standards. So you'll see that compliance and ethics accountability matrix throughout the slide deck because this is how we're addressing many of those risks. And then also in alignment with the enterprise risk is third parties. So our organization works with a variety of third parties, and the conduct, any work that the third parties do, if they have misconduct or they're not compliant, that could have a significant impact on our stakeholder trust. So it's important as an organization that we develop a set of principles that outline and define acceptable behavior and compliance. And so ECS plans to work the relevant, procurement and other partners to develop a code of conduct for third parties. We also plan to work with procurement and other business partners to enhance the contract management process. And then we'll continue to coordinate and refine the receipt and review of third-party internal controls reports. And then just by its very nature, investment ranked up there as a high compliance risk. And so ECS will continue to collaborate with investment compliance. So they're another of our aligned assurance partners. And one of the ways we're doing that is we're going to we're introducing a regulatory tracking notification tool. And this tool provides structured regulatory notifications that are sourced from 5,000 US and international regulators. So this tool is that it allows the user to customize what they want to know, like what regulations are they interested in and how often they want to receive it. I think this provides that proactive compliance insight in that the user is now become more aware of those regulations and laws that pertain to their business area. Now, as we introduce this, we're going to reiterate and emphasize that the business areas work with Office of General Counsel because they're the ones that are going to tell them the applicability of those laws and regulations. Oh, next slide. And then for the pension administration, one of the efforts compliance services will implement is a communication guide for leaders. And this communication guide is to allow the leaders to work with their staff during staff meetings or one-on-ones or informal trainings to just create that awareness of how the compliance requirements connect to their individual daily work. Safety, security, and resiliency is a top risk, and as you probably are aware, because of the pandemic, and then also the changing federal, state, and local requirements. So our goal here is to develop compliance, document the compliance processes around that, legal requirements and controls, and then identify and assess if there's any controls overlap or gaps. And then for the financial compliance risk, we'll update and validate the submission of the required external financial compliance reporting. And then for all of these three items, ECS will continue with ensuring our policies are reviewed annually. We're going to develop a policy handbook that will be able to provide to staff in order to help guide them through the policy management process. Then one other item that kind of is a theme throughout both those slides is that iterative compliance risk assessment. So we're maturing our process, but this really takes it to the next level. And the reason we do this is that we continue to engage and create and get feedback on our compliance risk profile. And then it keeps compliance, a focus, and it provides that proactive stance that management is mitigating those compliance risks. And also, I think is a key component is that it's a major factor in evaluating compliance program effectiveness. So I know I gave you, hopefully I didn't speak too fast, but I gave you a lot to digest. So with that, I just want to do a quick recap on three things. We performed an integrated risk assessment, which offered us an opportunity to realize efficiencies and gain that holistic view of the risk and mitigations occurring across the organization. We were able to mature our specific compliance risk assessment by this year quantifying and then also refining our risk profile. And then the results of the risk assessment and the work being performed by our integrated insurance providers, those items helped us develop the 2022 compliance plan. So that full plan is in ARM item 7, attachment 1. I appreciate the opportunity to share that with you, and I'm looking forward to any comments or questions you may have.
Great. Thank you very much, Cheryl. It's obviously a full plan and a lot of areas of focus. The way that you presented those particular compliance risks, are they in any priority order? Do you see one as a priority rising above any other?
Oh, go backwards. So those top 6, there's no particular order. There's no problem with getting this done. We have a great aligned assurance partners in information security and investments that, again, I've said this before, and that it takes a village. So it's not just, we have a small team, they do a lot of work, but we work with the organization to help reduce those risks. And so those are my top 6. And those activities that I spoke to were probably the primary focus.
Okay. And I think that's, you're driving my question. That is your mighty team of 4. Do you feel like you have sufficient resources to fully implement the plan?
With the help of the organization, yes.
Okay, very good. Questions from the committee? Yes, Gail, please.
Thank you so much. Third-party question on how code of conduct.
And we have a lot of third parties here. And I think, that can be value added. And I think, as you point out, can also be a pretty significant risk. On this slide, it looks like it's third. It seems to me like there's more than just one question. It's more than a code of conduct. It's also obviously the contracts we sign with expectations. What other thoughts do you have to make sure that we can encourage alignment? And what I do think this is an area the board can be a little bit more involved in, and especially this committee, and really understanding and looking specifically at some of those contracts. I think even Mr. Jensen, we just heard from all the people that did the audits. I mean, this is all our members' money, and I just want to make sure we're really making sure that we're getting everything we need out of those.
Yeah.
So I want to make just one comment
Yeah,
that,
please.
that this is a best practice to that code of conduct. So it's not that we have any misconduct. Okay, just
Right.
want to make sure I make that clear.
Oh, thank you. No, I was sure of that, but even more than that, I
Yes.
think a code of conduct, in my opinion, is sort of the floor.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's what else we're asking for.
Yep.
Absolutely agree with that.
And this rose in the enterprise risk. So Brian Bartow is actually heading that effort for third party, actually.
I just wanted to add a little bit. So Ms. Cheryl and her compliance team are part of this, but it's also one of our enterprise risks. We added it last year, and I am the executive sponsor. So we do have a team working and looking at a governance structure to try to look at contract risks. We're going to have some analytical tools to decide which buckets these relationships fall into. For example, is it technology, is it information, is it financial? And then what are some of the things that we're pushing out in our agreements? And are we back to compliance? Are we complying with those? Are we ensuring that our contractors are complying with those? So it's a multifaceted approach. We've added sustainability, DE&I as a risk in that area. So it's growing. It's a growing effort. It's across the organization. It's really under our risk management plan. So this is a nice synergy between what's happening with compliance and working with us on trying to get this up and running, working with procurement. So there are a lot of folks who are working on this. So you'll get more reporting on that in the risk management program.
Thank you. Could I ask one follow-up to that, Mr. Bartow? Is it possible then to create somewhat of an evaluation then as part of that process? Like how, not necessarily by the board, but a template for evaluation from the enterprise where we are where the board is updated on the performance of these various third parties that come in?
I think that would fit with what we're developing, which is a governance tool,
Got it.
which really is an analytical tool. And so I think that would be something we could very easily report on as we
Great.
put it together so that we can say, which vendors that we have fall into which categories. I know Larry started this effort quite a number of years ago where he sort of looked at who are the too big to fail vendors that we looked at. What's the risk, especially people who perform key functions in the organization. In other words, not just, supply and not just a consultant, but our key components. So that will be part of the analysis as well. Is, who are the vendors or which vendors are the ones that are in key positions that if there is a compliance failure or there is a failure of the organization, how does that fit on a risk matrix?
Thank you. I really appreciate that. And then just one follow-up in terms of the pension administration. If there's a delay, does that risk increase or does it just remain a risk? So if we don't have a new system, a new technological solution through the pension solution initiative, how does that risk change year over year? Or is it just, you'll keep it on the list until it's fully integrated?
Yeah, we look at what's happening now, so we would still keep it on our radar. And again, there has been, just generally looking at if there's an implementation of what we need to do for compliance, and it would work better with the new pension administration system. We're not going to wait if it's critical, right? Because we want to be in compliance. So we'll find a way. It may not be an automated way, maybe a manual process.
Got it. Okay. Thank you. Thank you,
Larry.
Madam Chair.
I think the risk that really increases is failure of our existing systems over time. right?
Yeah.
And that's what we're trying to really manage with implementation of the new system,
Yeah.
right? And
Right.
so from a compliance perspective, though, that would remain fairly constant.
Got it. Actually, I think that was more my question because obviously we're replacing an old system. So then right, exactly that. How long do we have until that system fails? And what do we need to do to ensure we understand that timing?
Exactly.
Great. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Gail, for the question. Joe? Okay.
I thought it was a really good one. I'm just thinking about our third parties and third party risk. So the update was great. And thank you, Brian, for and Cheryl for talking about what we're doing. And I guess one maybe question or comment I have is, as we're building out that framework, I'd encourage us to think about how overseeing vendors and setting expectations and continuing to ensure that vendors, you know, are managing risks or meeting those expectations be something that is managed throughout the organization, you know, sort of not compliance or not just procurement's job to figure out what all these vendors are doing, but, you know, the parts of the business that are retaining those vendors and working with them. I think it's incumbent upon them to be making sure that they're appropriately managing and following up and overseeing.
Yeah.
That's an excellent point. And we do have a decentralized contracting system. So you're absolutely spot on. That is actually part of the program. So
Great.
thank you for highlighting that.
Great, thank you.
And I wanted to just make one more mention. One of the things that enterprise compliance is working on is when working with procurement, right? We understand their process and we understand that contract management is decentralized. So how can we embed controls where that's just a part of the process that you know that you need to check this and check that before you move forward to the next level. So we're just going to brainstorm and work together. So again, and then we'll get feedback from the organization and those contract managers to make sure that will work. So like you said, we're sharing the responsibility,
Great.
but we're going to provide some tools and controls to make that easier.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you.
Good. Thank you. Really great points. Larry, further comments on this?
No, I just really appreciate the risk-based approach here because it really connects the dots, you know, between kind of the organization's, you know, compliance and then risk management across the organization as well. And it really kind of strengthens, you know, not only the compliance efforts, but reduction in risks based on these efforts. And it really helps focus on the right areas. And that's really important.
Good. Dr. Gutman? Nothing? Okay, very well. Are there other comments on this item? Is there any public comment on this item?
There are no public comment in the queue.
Thank you, Samantha. All right, with hearing none, Cheryl, thank you very much for the report. I really look forward to the updates coming before us. All right, we will now move to item number 8, which is the 2022 internal audit plan. Larry?
Okay, presentation coming up here too as well. The this item is our 2022 proposed internal audit plan. We also take a risk-based approach to this. And I mean, would like to share a little bit of that with you. And in our plan today, it also provides the committee with an overview of audit services mission, our scope of work, our level of independence and objectivity, and also allocation of resources. And the professional standards for internal auditing require that the chief auditor prepare a risk-based plan and ensure that it's sufficiently flexible, that reflects CalSTR's changing risk environment, as well as priorities of the organization. And the presentation today will provide an overview of our risk of audit services risk assessment processes to illustrate how this proposed plan was designed, and also how it aligns with the top risks of the organization, as well as the strategic goals. And so we use 2 separate processes. The first is for the employer audit program. The second is for the internal audit program. First, I'd like to discuss the employer audit risk assessment. And so this is really a lot of data that we assess in order to determine which employers we're going to audit. And we obtained 2 years of the most recent school years that we have complete data for. And so for this year's assessment, we took the school years ending July 2019 through June 2021, and we apply some risk factors to that. And we assess the laws, we have some discussions with management, and we have some predetermined risk factors that we use. And based on the application of those risk factors to the data, we risk rank the employers in a low, medium, or high category. And these are the 13 risk factors that we look at. And if they're located in the agenda item there, they're attachment 1 of item number 8. And it has a description of each of those, as well as the values that can be assigned to them, because these are weighted risk scores that are given. So for example, under risk factor 3 for special compensation, if we have an employer that reports a large amount of special compensation that may be over $2,500 per member, and they have several members that they're issuing the compensation to, we know that that's a high-risk area, and so it would be given a heavier weight. Whereas if we have an employer that didn't report any special compensation, then they would get a 0 on the weighting, of course, and that's how we apply that. So it's a very well thought out process. And of these 13 risk factors here, 3 are associated with potential spiking, as well as 3 that are related to high amounts of reported special compensation. And then the remaining risk factors focus in on sick leave and areas that we identify. And even like we have number 12, if it's a new employer, things like that, that are indicators that, there may be some misapplication or erroneous reporting risk. And then also number 13 is a new risk that we added this year. And based on past audits, if the employer is located within a county that has a high occurrence of systemic findings, we indicate that as well. And in some cases that could, if the County Office of Education is working with all of the districts to correct the reporting, then that could be very helpful for us, right? And so we rely on that as well. As a result of all of that number crunching that we do there, we have these identify the number of employers in each factor there, and then we group them. And something kind of interesting that we notice here, I'll share with you a couple of trends that we see is in risk factor number 1 and number 2 that deal with the high pay retirees. The number of employers trended upwards in the last couple of years. And then risk factor number 3, dealing with special comp over that $2,500 threshold that I mentioned, that also trended up. However, risk factor number 4, which is the 20% increases in active members, this looks like it's remained pretty consistent over the years. But what we really noticed is in risk number 5, which is one-time payments that are issued, we actually increased the threshold, and the number of employers that are issuing one-time payments has significantly decreased and it has a downward trend. And that's really the reason why I'm highlighting that is because in the last couple of years, we've focused our limited scope audits in that area and really trying to help the employers along with the training that's provided to them, understand how to report those one-time payments. And so we see that decrease trend there. So when we look at it by school type, though, this is our risk distribution here based on our nearly 1,800 reporting entities. We have 485 there. You can see the high, medium, low risks that are identified. And it's what's kind of interesting about this is because of the weighting, you'll notice that community college, a large percentage of those are rated high risk. And that's because they have a large number of members in the community college districts, as well as if there is an error, then the impact of that is far greater than, say, charter schools, who you'll notice has a lower number of entities in the high risk area, because just the sheer few number of members in charter schools and the impact is lower. And so when we focus the areas of highest risk, that's the results that you'll see there. And so when we also look at that, we determine the available resources that we have. And we have set a goal for this next year of completing 120 audits. That would be slightly more than what we've done this year. And then that would include 10 full scope audits, as well as the 110 limited scope audits. And we really have focused on the limited scope audits the last few years. And you can see in this slide here, the full scope audits is illustrated in green, whereas the other colors are limited term or limited scope audits and their categories. And you see a downward trend in those full scope audits and more focus on the limited scope. And the reason why that is those limited scopes are dependent upon our data analytics that we use, and really helps us dial in on particular payroll reports that are provided to CalSTRS. The other thing, as I've stressed to the committee, is that the emphasis has been really trying to correct active member data and those limited scopes. Primarily the population that we look at is for the active members. And so that's why you see most of the corrections, even if it's a systemic finding or not, are related to active members. And the idea is that we want to provide accurate information at the time of retirement so that the member can rely on that benefit that they receive and that it's not going to change significantly over time. And it really helps us focus in and make those corrections on the active member data. So we're continuing to emphasize that. Also in learning how to remote audit, that's keeping a focused audit like that is also very, very helpful. So we'll focus on the limited scope audits and 120 for this next year on the employer audit program. Is there any questions with regards to the employer audit program and our process for that? If not, I'll move on to the internal audit process. With this, we look at a lot of factors, both internal and external, such as industry benchmarks, and conducted as Cheryl described, a number of interviews, 25 different interviews that we participated in, and we look at the history and have discussions about how to quantify our risks within the organization, and we use our criteria to determine our internal audit universe as well. We prioritize those activities and rank them again. This is the results of our internal audit. Those you'll see that there's these are listed in risk order there, and there are several that we are proposing to audit. Those are that are in the red. You'll see there's 22 of those, and there's also a number of them that list as high rank that we either have that were included in the 21 plan that we are auditing this year, or that we've audited in the last few years. And then there's a few that are listed that are kind of potential audits that we look at. They're just simply not mature enough, right now. So for example, the collaborative model, we're watching what's happening there, and that will be an item for a future audit, but not mature enough yet. And so that's an example of it. So in our plan, we do have the 22 audits that are listed here. You'll see though that we're focused really on the strategic goals of the organization, as well as the top enterprise risks, and some of the larger projects that we have, and just administration of the system. And this demonstrates how the enterprise risks link to the internal audits that are proposed, and we're really focused on helping to provide assurance that management is managing and reducing those enterprise risks across the organization, and we will provide that level of independent assurance. And it focuses on all areas that of enterprise risks that are presented to the board regularly. This one also demonstrates how those audits that we propose are connected to our strategic goals and accomplishment of our goals as an organization. We feel that it's important to provide the board assurance as well on management's efforts to achieve those goals. And it also assists management in ensuring that controls are in place to effectively achieve our strategic initiatives across the organization. So in summary, the plan includes 120 employer audits, right? 22 internal audits. That we have we have some time set aside for management requests and special projects that might come up throughout the year as new risks are introduced or that change across the organization. We also allocate time in there for other activities such as audit follow-up, our quality assurance program that you heard the results of that at our last meeting, are conducting our new risk assessment, and then there's always training and administration of the office. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Okay, thank you very much, Larry. Maybe before questions, Dr. Yetman, you want to?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just wanted to point out, Member Haga, for that's change order, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the building, they'll be looking at, they're scheduled to do, the organization's scheduled to do an internal audit on the new building, but in particular, narrowly focused on what I call change orders. Yeah, because that's, yeah.
So I'm sorry, we're looking at change orders now. We just kicked one off on change orders and I'm sorry, on this one that's in the plan here. Yeah, briefly, recently the board has been presented with budget changes and there's been some drivers behind those budget changes. And so we felt it was important in collaboration to perform an audit of that and ensure that, the accuracy of the reporting and those cost drivers are in fact, substantiated with sufficient evidence and provide assurance to the board that the budget is being managed appropriately.
Great, thank you. Questions or comments, members? No? I just have one question, Larry, and a topic that I know that you're aware the board is very interested in, and that is the survivor and death benefit distributions to beneficiaries. And just wanted to kind of get your sense of just kind of the time orientation about looking at those two areas and whether we'll be getting, some updates about these programs in the next year.
Yeah, and so we will complete this year's plan, by December of this year, and then we will initiate and the new plan if it's approved. And I would say that, by mid-year, those would be completed and reported to the committee. So we probably would receive a report of those at the July meeting. I just committed Roseanne to that, right?
I see nodding
She's
heads.
shaking her head, yeah.
Okay, great, thank you. Thank you.
We'll put that one as a priority. Thank you.
Okay, very well. Let me see if there is any public comment on this item on the 2022 internal audit plan.
There are no members of the public in queue.
Thank you, Samantha. All right, this is an action item, members, and is there a motion? Okay, we have a motion by Ms. Siga to approve the plan. Is there a second? Second by Ms. Yamamoto. Trevor?
Ms. Higa?
Yeah.
Ms. Yamamoto?
Aye.
Ms. Miller for the Director of Finance? Mr. Rufino for the State Treasurer?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson for the Superintendent of Public Instruction?
Yes.
Controller Yi?
Aye.
The motion passes.
Okay, thank you very much, Larry. Look forward to the reports coming forward on this item. All right, we now are going to move to our information items, a review of information requests. Trevor, I think there were a few.
On item 3, there was an investigation in the delineation of adjustments between one-time payments and adjustments to ongoing benefits to see if this data could be provided to the committee.
Yeah.
And that was the only information request I had.
Okay, great, thank you. All right, let's see. And then Larry, the draft agenda for the next committee meeting?
Actually, that's our first time we'll provide a report to the committee on the progress on the management letter that we just reviewed today, as well as we'll have Kevin and Jen back with us at that meeting to kind of outline their approach to the 21-22 fiscal year audit. And then we also will receive reports on updates from our compliance services final plan for the year, as well as from internal audit. And then it's our first opportunity to look at the committee's work plan for the next fiscal year. I think that'll be a really important item. And then we have an education committee, a committee education item on the agenda. Julie and I have had some preliminary discussions already. Controller Yi will reach out to you and coordinate that for this next March meeting.
Terrific, good. Look forward to a robust March meeting. Thank you. All right, we'll now move to opportunity for statements from the public. This is our public comment period at the end of our meeting. Any members of the public who wish to address the committee?
There are no members of the public in queue.
Great, thank you, Samantha. Okay, any other business to come before the committee? Hearing and seeing none. Thank you all very much for the terrific work and really appreciate all the reports. And with that, the Audits and Risk Management Committee is adjourned. Thank you, everyone.